Yeah, and just it's fighting for your country, sure, but it's also just adventure. I mean, this is the most exciting thing, that you can do. And then once you get a taste of it, it's addictive. It's absolutely addictive. And so it's hard to put it away. You come back and all you can think about is going over again. And when you're there, it's almost like time stops, because the rest of the world keeps turning, but in your little corner of it, it it's all reduced to what's like right in front of your face, right? Like it's a very strange thing, and as I say, it's addictive. So I think guys get caught up in that cycle. Um, there's a great book by a fellow named Anthony Lloyd. It's called "My War Gone By, I Miss It So." Um, so he was a British Army officer, but went to Yugoslavia during the Civil War to become a photojournalist, but was so like guilt ridden by kind of being there with people who couldn't get out themselves, that he chose to be there. He didn't take a picture for 6 months. And when
Hmm.
he finally did, um, he found that he was addicted to it, addicted to war. So he left the Yugoslavia, went back to London, where he got addicted to heroin. And then
Wow.
his twin addictions, war and heroin, he bounces back and forth between them, trying to, he uses one to kick the other.
Battle Line Podcast. Ian Scotto here. Chris Peranto is actually about to speak at Ranger graduation. He's driving out there. But do not go anywhere. We've got a great show for you. It's been a long time since we've had any Canadian vets on the show. I mean, we've had on people like Rob Furlong, record breaking Canadian sniper, Jeff DePazzi, JTF2 vet, Canada Special Operations. But yeah, we haven't had anyone in a while. So on with me is Phil Halton, former Canadian Army officer and security contractor who has done work in Afghanistan and Iraq, author of several books, the latest of which is Red Warning, a historical fiction thriller taking place in Afghanistan in the late 1970s. We get into everything. We get into military foreign policy. We get into some of the recent tension between Canada and America that we both kind of agree is completely ridiculous because these are two nations who should be allies through thick and thin, I certainly think. And we even get into a little bit of hockey, just a little bit at the very end. But before we get into this interview with Phil Halton, I wanted to talk about Bubs Naturals because Bubs puts out the greatest collagen supplements out there because they're single sourced, grass fed collagen. But I've really been using Hydrate or Die more than anything. Look, things are getting warmer. If you want to go for an outdoor run, you are going to want to rehydrate with more than just water. And that Himalayan pink salt that they put in Hydrate or Die is an absolute game changer. You're going to feel replenished and refreshed, and you're drinking something without all the extra sugar and crap and all natural ingredients that you're going to love. I personally love the lemon flavor. That's my favorite, but Hydrate or Die, you got to check out. You got to check out Bub's Brew for the best coffee out there. You could try all of these great supplements when you go to bubsnaturals.com. And here's the thing, they've been partnered with us for a long time now, for several years, which we really appreciate. And they pass on that value to you when you use the promo code BATTLELINE as a first-time customer. You're going to get 20% off your entire order. That's bubsnaturals.com. Use the promo code BATTLELINE, one word, for 20% off. And you're not just going to get supplements you love, you're also going to support the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation in the process. So check them out. And with that, let's get over to Phil Halton.
From Kansas City to New York City, from planet Earth to extraterrestrial life in space, a podcast with no equal, engaged in unconventional warfare through your speakers and headphones. This is a show about embracing the suck, conquering your demons, and finding God in the face of adversity. Chris Tonto Peranto.
Switch is on. Motherfucker, I'm gonna shoot you in the face.
Ian Scotto.
Ian and I have been dating for a long time.
You are now tuned into the Battle Line Podcast.
The switch is on. Battle Line Podcast. On with me is Phil Halton, former Canadian Army officer and security contractor, has work in Afghanistan, Iraq, book publisher, author. I know really book publisher with Double Dagger Books, but yeah, it's great to have you on. I mean, there's a wealth of knowledge there. I know you help other veterans in writing their books, and I'm excited to get into everything.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to just kind of spread the word, right? Because I think there are a lot of veterans who have stories to tell, who are trying to figure out how to get those stories out there.
Oh, absolutely. So I guess a good place to start would be joining the Canadian Army and, what inspired you to join. Because every time we have vets on, which is hundreds of episodes at this point, I think everybody has a different origin story. And for some people, it's patriotism. For other, it's just the benefits of becoming a veteran. What inspired you to join and to serve?
Yeah, so I mean, I joined right out of high school. Um, I was lived in a pretty small town just outside of Toronto, in Ontario, and I really grew up on stories of my grandfather who was in the British Army during the Second World War. Um, but rather than kind of all the normal war stories, I guess that you might expect, his career during the war took him to Iraq, took him to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, to Nepal, all these crazy places. And he was like a blue collar kid from inner city London whose mind was blown by all these different places in the world that he got to see. And so I mean, I don't think I necessarily connected all the dots for myself, but I thought like that's a ticket to get out of small town nowhere and see the world. And so I mean, that was the inspiration. And it turned out to be true in my case too, that I did see a lot of the world.
So what era was this that you joined? Like around what time?
Yeah, so I joined in the early 90s.
Cool. So then the combat stuff really must have been later on during the contracting days, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny actually, because I was in the regular army when the war in Afghanistan broke out. But I had just come back from a tour as a peacekeeper in Yugoslavia, and then to kind of get the corners sanded off of my combat arms officer self, I was sent away from my regiment, as is very normal, to go do a non-combat arms job. I was in a brigade headquarters working as a G1, as the human resources administrator, and I hated it. And I just couldn't stand that there was stuff going on in the world, and I was stuck there behind a desk. And so I actually got out of the regular army and into the reserve so that I could go to Afghanistan my own and like start working there. So it's kind of a funny transition, but I just at the time couldn't see that this was going to be a 20-year war and that there was going to be
Yeah,
lots of time for everybody. I was
sure.
like, no, get me there like now. And it kind of grew from there.
Yeah, there's a number of guys we have had on who have that story. Like we've had on Terry Shepard, who's a Green Beret, and he was a, peacetime Green Beret, and then 9/11 happens and he's National Guard and finds his way to get back into the theater. And it's kind of crazy, right? As the civilian on the show, usually Chris is on with me, that guys are like anxious to go to war because I think people think of draft dodgers and all that, and people are like, yeah, I don't want to possibly die for my country. And so it's like it's a special breed of person who wants to go out there and fight for their country.
Yeah, and just it's fighting for your country, sure, but it's also just adventure. I mean, this is the most exciting thing that you can do. And then once you get a taste of it, it's addictive. It's absolutely addictive, and so it's hard to put it away. You come back, and all you can think about is going over again. And when you're there, it's almost like time stops. Because the rest of the world keeps turning, but in your little corner of it, it it's all reduced to what's like right in front of your face, right? Like It's a very strange thing, and as I say, it's addictive. So I think guys get caught up in that cycle. Um, there's a great book by a fellow named Anthony Lloyd. It's called "My War Gone By, I Miss It So." Um, so he was a British Army officer, but went to Yugoslavia during the Civil War to become a photojournalist, but was so like guilt ridden by kind of being there with people who couldn't get out themselves. You know that he chose to be there. He didn't take a picture for 6 months, and when
Mm.
he finally did, um, he found that he was addicted to war. So he left the Yugoslavia, went back to London, where he got addicted to heroin, and then
Wow.
his twin addictions, war and heroin, he bounces back and forth between them, trying to, uses one to kick the other. It's a
Yeah,
very interesting story.
yeah, both of those are not something that you should want to, continue doing. It's kind of crazy because we've had guys on the podcast without even mentioning them, but like there's guys who are out there contracting who are really at an age where it's like you should be maybe like retired and doing something relaxing and playing golf or something. And yet to me and to much of the audience, probably the civilian members of the audience, like we don't get it.
Yeah, and so that's why I think it's so important for veterans to tell their stories, um, because we've got something to say. We've got a unique perspective on the world, and it's not something that I think can get faked. You don't see a lot of purely civilian writers who can write this stuff convincingly. Um, and when you do, it's pretty magical that they can pull it off. But so this is part of the reason that I wanted to start writing, not just to tell like my war stories, but to tell my perspective on the war in Afghanistan, for example. Um, and yeah, and I really find it deeply meaningful in my own life to help veterans get their stories out there. Whether I agree with them on everything or not is something separate.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with you is generally when we have authors on the show, they either write memoirs or they write these fiction thrillers. You've done both.
Yeah, well, I haven't written a memoir myself.
But
I've
you've written
written,
nonfiction, I mean.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I wrote a history of the war in Afghanistan, but a social history. So not a military history of the war, but like what the conflict's actually about. Um, in part because when I was there, I found that there's a question that people should have been able to answer that nobody could give me a straight answer, and it was a simple one. It's when did the war in Afghanistan start? And so people would say, oh, well, 9/11. It's like, no, no, that's when we showed up. Like, this is like, when did this war start? And people, oh, well, the Soviets, um, or the Anglo-Afghan wars in the 19th century, or Alexander the Great, or they've always been fighting. And it's all this kind of nonsensical answers. I was like, no, no, like this war, the one we're in right now, that you and me that we're doing, when did it start? And I didn't think that anybody had a satisfactory answer, and I didn't think I had one either. And so over, being there over many years, I was asking questions about of all kinds of people, like, what do you think? Where is this coming from? What is driving this? And so that drove me to write a pretty substantial, serious nonfiction book about it.
I know you want people to pick up the book, obviously, but from your expert perspective of doing the research, when did it start?
Haha. Yeah, so I revealed the answer in the first few pages. So there's no spoilers here. And the book's called Blood Washing Blood,
Yeah,
Afghanistan's 100-Year War, which kind of gives it away as well.
sure.
Um, but I think that you can kind of pin it down to a date. It's the 20th of February, 1919. Um, and why that date? The emir, the king of Afghanistan, was assassinated, probably by his son, while sleeping in his tent at his hunting camp. Someone put a revolver behind his ear and killed him. And his replacement, the young emir, saw himself as a reformer. And so he did all kinds of stuff that really sounds modern to us. He put girls in schools. He outlawed the veil. He tried to reform law to become secular rather than religious. He made his wife the minister of education. Did all kinds of stuff. and that frankly we tried to do too. Um, and predictably, when he did this, the country lost their minds. There were uprisings, but there were uprisings in all the same places that were bad places in 2011, or 2002. All the same places, all the same people, all the same families, all the same tribes. And so you can trace this social conflict over issues of whether power is centralized in Kabul or decentralized in the regions, whether it's a secular power or a religious power. You can see this argument essentially carrying on for 100 years, and breaking out into fighting pretty regularly. And so the Soviets being there, us being there, this is all secondary. Like they're Afghans fighting Afghans over Afghan stuff.
Yeah. What was your feeling of on the withdrawal from Afghanistan? Because I feel like every veteran we've had on has very strong feelings on the way it was left, the equipment that was left behind, and a lot of guys are like, "What did we accomplish? Why did we even go over there?" And I think you're even seeing more veteran suicides over things like that because people do want to obviously believe that their sacrifice for all those years in that region was for something, and a lot of guys are finding hard to pinpoint like anything positive that was accomplished when you look at the way it was left behind.
Yeah, I don't think there is really much anything positive that was accomplished that you can point your fingers at, other than 20 years of relative modernization, not even stability. And that's what we bought collectively was 20 years of a chance. But I think, like, unfortunately, I think the war was lost in about 2005. And everything after that, was kind of shoring up a crumbling house. And it was lost, I think, because we didn't really take advantage of a small window in time when there could have been modernization and reforms, and we didn't do it. We kind of took the easy road. And some of that easy road was allying with frankly reprehensible, warlords, with various regional power brokers is maybe the more polite phrase for it, and getting tainted with their stuff, right? So is it, what do I think about it? It's upsetting, it's frustrating, but also I've been sort of saying, hey, there's a problem since about 2005, and so I'm not really surprised that that's how it ended. It had to end sometime.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up 2005 because so I'm 38, and I'm in the US, unlike you. So the first presidential election I ever voted in was John Kerry versus George Bush for George Bush's
Right.
second term. And beyond the conservative and liberal differences, I think the main point of that election, more than really anything, and it was the number one thing we were talking about, you had George Bush on one side saying we need to finish the job and you John Kerry saying we need to withdraw now. And regardless of how people feel about all their other positions, because it's
Sure.
obviously a plethora of other opinions on things, it's hard to imagine what things would have been like if we withdrew 20 years ago, which is when John Kerry would have become president had he won that election. It would have been a totally different ball game. Maybe positive, maybe negative, but things would have
Yeah.
been very different.
Yeah, that's right. And because at that sort of moment in time, the Taliban were actually defeated. That scattered. They didn't have the power that they had even 2 years later. Um, and so, yeah, I think you could craft a strategy of, withdrawal of most of the ground troops, some kind of special forces presence, some kind of strike capability to disrupt, and Afghanistan doesn't become a perfect model of Western democracy in Southwest Asia, but it also doesn't go the other way. And so what was good enough, and maybe it could have been good enough.
Yeah, I always think about this prior to even doing this podcast or this, show that we do. When I was working at SOFREP, I interviewed Dan Hampton, who's a fighter pilot, and he was talking about problems with American foreign policy. And I always just remember what he said was that he said America and probably Canada as well is very good at what he called terrorist whack-a-mole. Like, we hunt down
Right.
these terrorists, but just like the game whack-a-mole, they keep popping up. And there really is no easy solution, and it's like in order to fight this, you need to fight the heart of the ideology and make terrorism not be cool, for lack of a better way of putting it, in these regions, because otherwise, more and more terrorists are going to pop up, and I think that's for like every war regarding terrorism. I think if you look at what's going on now in Gaza, no matter what people think about this war, there's going to be a lot of new terrorists created when things change.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for every person that's killed or injured, you're creating new radicals, right? Like,
Sure.
and that's not like that's not unreasonable given the situation, right? Like if uh you kind of can all see ourselves becoming radicalized if it's our family and our houses and all that
Yeah.
are getting destroyed, right? It's yeah, the terrorist whack-a-mole thing is definitely an issue. Certainly not a popular idea, but we've, when you look at like British colonialism, right, as a different model of with a tremendous number of negatives, but a different model. Obviously, the like those British service officers spoke local languages, you knew local customs, and expected to live in these places for years in order to become integrated and to really understand the societies that they're dealing with. Completely different than the more modern model of isolated bases, people rotating in and out, very little real contact with the local population. So if we were really serious, and that Afghanistan needed to become a functioning Western style democracy, then they needed to build PMQs, like married quarters in Kandahar, and post people there, and and stick them there for years. Um, but no, we weren't willing to do that. So short of that, the outcome's not really a big surprise.
Yeah, and then in opposition to that, you have a lot of people, a lot of them who have been on the show who are like, we shouldn't be there for regime
Yeah,
change or to be the world police. We should
right.
be there to kill terrorists and leave.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's the other option, right? Like either, and we took the middle path, right? Like we didn't do the light boots on the ground strike package, just kind of disrupt, and we didn't do the let's move our families over here and really make this work. We picked something in the middle, and it was obviously messy.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, guys. Hope you're enjoying this episode with Phil Halton. I'm just jumping in here for a minute to remind you all that we have the best ammo sponsor on the planet that you absolutely have to check out, and that is none other than Fort Scott Munitions. So many of our listeners have become shooters of Fort Scott Munitions. They've changed from whatever ammo they were shooting with, and they're now using Fort Scott Munitions because ammo makes a huge difference, especially for home defense, although they also have a range ammo as well. Fort Scott is a manufacturer of multi-federal patented solid copper and brass CNC spun ammunition that is designed to tumble upon impact TUI, their trademark, in soft tissue, leaving devastating wound channels for faster bleed out and quicker incapacitation. This ammo was originally developed to innovate and improve on the standard of military-grade ammunition design. It was found that not only did the TUI ammunition outperform competitors in the self-defense industry, but it quickly became apparent that it would be a top contender for hunters alike. With the ammo being CNC spun, the tolerances are some of the tightest on the market, ensuring that you receive the same results with each pull of the trigger. Fort Scott Munitions is available throughout privately owned businesses in all 50 states, but you're going to get the best deal through us when you go to FSM.com and you use the promo code BATTLELINE. FSM.com, promo code BATTLELINE. That's going to get you 15% off most things on the site, so be sure to check them out. FSM.com, promo code BATTLELINE. And it's been a minute since we've had the guys from Photonis Defense on the show, and they've been really working hard with doing more U.S. manufactured night vision. And they have the best night vision out there. Yes, you're going to pay a premium price for a premium product, and I want people to be aware of that because this is something that's going to last you many, many years as opposed to going to a local sporting goods store, or I should say shooting store most of the time, gun shop, and getting something that's not made in America, that's not going to last very long, Go with Photonis Defense. Now you can have the superpower to see in the dark with the Viper Binocular Night Vision System by Photonis, the global leader in night vision solutions, providing more high quality night vision capabilities than anyone. Believe it. Military, law enforcement, and public safety end users utilize Photonis Defense solutions to give them the edge at night in tactical situations and rescue operations. Hunters, shooters, boaters, and enthusiasts can rely on the Photonis Defense Viper binoculars to become masters of darkness. The new Viper binocular system carries the same features and benefits as the Photonis Defense Viper monocular, with a ruggedized body and harnesses the power of the Echo intensifier tubes, giving you sharper images, reduced halo, and industry-leading ultra-fast auto-gating across the range of dynamic operating conditions. Visit photonisdefense.com right now for more information, or look for Photonis Defense product options from your night vision dealer. That is PHOTONIS defense.com, photonisdefense.com. With that, let's get back with more Phil Halton.
But in my research, I found a tremendous amount of information from about Afghanistan in the 50s and 60s from American universities in the Midwest. People doing PhD theses about agriculture and engineering projects and all the rest of it, where there were like a tremendous number of American academics involved in Afghanistan in the 50s and 60s. That in Helmand, with the big dam project that was there, and all of the agriculture that was created really by USAID, with American advice and assistance, not to mention money. But so they're like, Helmand was seen as like a little America in Afghanistan. There was a drive-in movie theater. So it's not so crazy, this idea of not just regime change, but really massive development. There just wasn't the political will, or the public will to do it.
Did you start writing books while you were a contractor, or is that something you did when you came home and just wanted to put your thoughts down?
I didn't do it while I was working there. I mean, and I think of myself as a storyteller. Kind of, that's how I connect with all this. And so I was always a storyteller. When I was in uniform or whatnot, I was always the guy who had a funny story to tell you about whatever just happened or whatnot. But no, it was only later that I really kind of got serious about putting these stories down and trying to get them out there. I started with screenwriting. I worked with an established screenwriter, and he and I wrote a screenplay together, set in Afghanistan, and really kind of skewering how we approached hearts and minds. Because really the people whose hearts and minds were most aligned with ours kind of got nothing, right? Because they're like, no, you're already in the win column. We're going to try to spend money to get these guys out of the lose column. And those are the folks who didn't really want the money, or didn't really want what came with it. But we wrote this film. Everybody loved it. Nobody wanted it, which is kind of the Hollywood story, right? So we wrote another film. Same thing. Everybody loved it. Nobody wanted it. So I decided to write a film on my own this time. Same thing. Didn't go anywhere. At which point I decided, you know what, like, filmmaking's a team sport, and novels are kind of more of an individual sport. And so I took that screenplay and turned it into a novel. And wouldn't you know, I sold the novel and the screenplay actually within a week of each other.
Wow. And which was that? Because I know you have a ton of different work. So
yeah, so that was This Shall Be a House of Peace is what the novel is called. It's kind of an origin story for the Taliban. I had a bunch of ex-Taliban guys working for me at different times, and I kind of cobbled together their stories to kind of talk about, like, how did this happen?
Wow.
And it's kind of a slippery slope moral story too, because at the start there's a little village and they're getting hassled by bandits, and they stand up for themselves, and I think people will go, yeah, I believe in that. That makes sense to me. I would do that. But then, as I say, it's a slippery slope. And as they make more and more decisions, and the decisions start compounding on each other, by the time you get to the end, I kind of question, like, when did you get off the bus? When did you decide that you were out? Um, and lo and behold, when you get to the end, it's like, oh, this is the Taliban. Like, what? Um, yeah. So
And your latest book is Red Warning, which is a fictional thriller. It's about Afghanistan in the 1970s.
yeah,
And you put that out about a year ago, right? A year,
yeah,
right? About
that's
a
right.
year.
Yeah,
Yeah, that seems to be doing really well. It's resonating with a lot of people. Yeah,
yeah.
what inspired that? I mean, it seems like you're doing a lot of work on Afghanistan specifically.
Yeah, I'm almost done with Afghanistan. I'm trying to get some
Okay.
Afghanistan ghosts out. With Red Warning, I signed a 3 book deal. I've got the second book just about finished. So, but those might be my last Afghanistan books. 'Cause I'm finding I'm kind of running out of things to say. But Red Warning is a crime novel. It's set in 1978. The main character is a police detective, an Afghan police detective. Um, and he's a dirty cop, right? Um, I wasn't in Afghanistan in 1978,
Of
but
course, yeah.
but I worked with a lot of dirty cops over the years, and so I kind of I wanted to explore what that looks like. What's it look like to be a police officer or an official inside an essentially corrupt system, and why is it corrupt? How is it corrupt? And how do you navigate that? And weaving into that, 1978 was crazy times in Afghanistan. Um, and so, communist revolution, essentially, a coup at the very least. And so, kind of weaving in all that history as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's something different too, because I think a lot of guys are writing thrillers that are pure fantasy, and this has a lot of historical accuracies.
Yeah, well, in terms of other writers, like I love James Elroy. Like L.A. Confidential would be kind of maybe his most famous work, right? Um, but he's writing about 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s Los Angeles. But he weaves all kinds of great history in there, as well as a lot of stuff that he's made up. And it's hard to tell the difference at times, but even the stuff that's fiction is illuminating something he's trying to say about American culture at the time. And so I sort of try to take a page from his book, um, in that even things that aren't purely true, I'm trying to say something that's is true.
Yeah, and like I said, it's resonating with a lot of people. I know your other passion, of course, Double Dagger books and coaching other veterans on their own writing. So how did that all begin?
Yeah, so I mean, as a writer, though I had some good success early on, I did find that every book I wrote, I was like had to go back to a publisher, sort of cap in hand, and say, this is my book. What do you think? And I just there's nowhere else in my life that I was in that position. And it was because military books or even military adjacent books are kind of hard sells. Um, Military thrillers, like, sure, there's definitely a big market for that, but stuff that's maybe a little more thoughtful, or in a slightly different kind of setting, really hard to sell. And so I realized, that there were thousands of manuscripts out there that folks had written that didn't find a home, right? And that the kinds of books that I love to read, um, weren't getting published. And so from that, Double Dagger Books was born. It's Canada's only, military and national security focused publisher. We do a mix of fiction, nonfiction, and memoirs. We've even done poetry. It's really guided by, like, what are the books that we like to read, and if it's something that we want to read, then we'll find a way to get it out to the public. We've got some really interesting memoirs that have come out, some really, like, thoughtful, different takes on things, some experimental fiction, Canadian and American writers. So some neat stuff. And then from that was born kind of the next hop in my evolution, which is there were a lot of folks who had stories who they wanted to tell, but they couldn't figure out how to write it. They're just not natural writers. not or they don't. Maybe they're good writers in short stories, but they don't know how to put together like a long form thing like a novel. Um, and there's lots of courses you can take. There's lots of books you can buy, but the way that I find learn in the military isn't that, right? It's like somebody's your co-pilot, somebody's there
Yeah.
shoulder to shoulder with you, showing you how to do stuff. And so that coaching model really resonates.
Do you think when you said these military memoirs and that type of thing are a hard sell, do you think some of that, because you're a Canada-based publisher, is the cultural differences between Canada and America? Because I do think we think of ourselves as very similar, and we are. But I know, like when I had Rob Furlong on the show, record-breaking Canadian sniper, he said
Yeah.
there's a huge difference when it comes to America between how veterans are respected here versus there. And that's from just his own words that he said it is almost like that hero worship level in parts of America. And in Canada, he said he doesn't feel that same respect. I don't know if that's the same for you because I don't know if it's as hard of a sell to do those books here in America because there are plenty of military memoirs. Granted, a lot of them are the guys who have seen a ton of action, but I do think there's a market for it here, certainly.
Well, Double Dagger Books sells most of our books, even Canadian titles in the United States. So clearly there is a bigger market for that kind of thing in the US. The Canadian book publishing industry is a bit of a strange one. It receives a lot of government funding, and that government funding is tied to what the publishers are publishing. And so there's a real focus on literary fiction and various things that are the agenda of the government of the day. Double Dagger Books isn't publicly funded. It doesn't receive any government money, so we can kind of publish whatever we want. We can publish non-Canadian writers. We can focus on non-Canadian markets. So yeah, so it's Canadian publishers are so focused on Canada itself that I think that all these things together limit the military market in Canada. We're kind of able to ignore all that and just publish good military stuff, and it finds an audience.
I will say Canada has so many really special guys who I think people need to read their stuff or get to know them. When I just think of what we do here, like I said, Rob Furlong, Canadian record-breaking sniper. There's several Canadian snipers who have broken records. I worked for many years for Brandon Webb, Navy SEAL sniper instructor, ran the Navy SEAL program in terms of that, in terms of sniping school, sniper school, and he's originally from Canada. We've had guys on the show like Jeff DePazzi from JTF too. I mean, you guys have some
Yep.
amazing special operations teams that do some really incredible stuff, and yeah, there needs to be books on that. There's a million books on Navy SEALs, and not a million, but quite a lot on Green Berets and Army Rangers, and there
Yeah.
is a little bit of secrecy when it comes to a group like JTF too.
Right. Well, in Navy SEALs, that's become its own genre of book.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
like like that's a category you see at Barnes and Noble on the shelf. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a cultural difference, and I don't want to stretch it too far because Canadians are as different from each other as Americans are as different, from each other. Like
Sure.
it's a big country and lots of different subcultures, but Canadians tend to be a little more quiet about these things. They're less likely to kind of trumpet this stuff.
Sure.
Um, you don't see as many Canadian flags like on Canadian houses as you do American flags and American houses. It's just a bit of a different kind of approach. They say sometimes that Canadians we chop the heads off the tall daisies. No one wants to stand up too much. But I agree. There's tremendous stories that need to be told. And so some of it is kind of encouraging guys to come out from the shadows and actually talk about this stuff because Canadians aren't aware of it. We've got a book coming out in the fall called Send It, which is the story of Canadian snipers in Afghanistan. Um, and that's where Canadian snipers beat the world record for longest shot. And there's like a tremendous amount of great stuff going on in that whole period, and nobody knows anything about it.
Yeah, the thing that you're saying about Canadians being less, I guess, boastful about their country and that type of thing, I think maybe some of it, at least right now, the past few years, it may have to do with leadership. I do know Trudeau is not very popular among a lot of Canadians and that type of thing. And I think maybe if there are some changes structurally to government, you may see some changes with that. Like, no matter how you felt about it, and I know it would get into politics, but when we saw that Canadian trucker protest during the height of COVID, I mean, I thought those people very much were proud to be Canadian and were standing up for at least what they perceived as their rights. And I think when you saw a government attacking those people and calling them terrorists and that type of thing, yeah, they're not going to get in line with that type of leadership. And I think if you had like a leadership that was more grassroots, maybe things would change over there. I mean, I know we have a president who's extremely polarizing, but all that type of thing kind of changes the attitudes.
Right. So, you know what, I think more so than a leadership change in Canada, what has really made a big difference in terms of Canadians pulling together and being a bit sort of louder in their patriotism is actually the friction going on with the United States right now.
Sure.
Um, and so uh, like I think sometimes it takes that kind of inside or outsider kind of feelings, right? Because I live on the east coast of Canada. I may not feel like I have a lot in common with folks on the west coast of Canada, but if there's an outside pressure, then like we're both Canadians, and that we feel that kind of quickly. Um, so I think it's been a weird number of years, though, right? Because the
Oh,
pandemic
absolutely. Yeah.
created a whole other kind of sense of togetherness and also separateness. Coming out of that, yeah, you're right. We had a very unpopular government um, that became sort of increasingly unpopular as the years went on. Of course, Trudeau is now resigned.
Yeah.
We have an election coming up, what, in another week, and so yeah, it remains to be seen what that will do. But it does feel like a bit of a new era for Canadian patriotism and displays of patriotism, and hopefully that translates into book sales.
Yeah, that would be great. And I also hope that it's not this clash between the US and Canada. There's no reason for there to be a clash. And I mean, I've always felt, and I think most Americans feel, Canada has always been a great ally and partner of America. And it's a place that Americans, at least, recently relatively like go to travel and Canadians come here to travel. And I know
Yeah,
that we're hearing a lot of that is changing right now because of the general attitudes. And like, yeah, I never thought there would be a time that during the NHL All-Star game that Canadians are booing the national anthem, and I definitely don't want to see more of that because I do think there needs to be a continued partnership and not this hostility towards one another because of our government, not because of people like you and I.
yeah, well, that's it. That's why I picked my words carefully. I was thinking it's friction because it's not quite a
Yeah.
clash. It's not entirely hostility. It's just like an irritant, you know. But yeah, when individual Canadians and Americans talk, yeah, there's really there's no basis for conflict. When Canadians and Americans, shared bases in Afghanistan, um, there's no basis for conflict. Like it's I'm pretty confident this is all going to blow over in time, but it's going to take sort of good faith on both sides, to get us back to where we were.
Absolutely. So do you keep in touch with a lot of guys who are currently on the ground, who are contractors wherever? Because I know people think, okay, the war in Afghanistan is over, but we have private contractors who are all over the globe, depending on your perspective, protecting freedom or doing all types of things that the general public probably doesn't and maybe shouldn't know about.
Yeah, so I mean, I try to keep a finger in with my friends and have a sense of what's going on. And this comes back to this issue though of like that it's addictive. Um, because I'm not going back overseas to do that kind of work again. Um, but it's sort of there in the back of my mind, like it's a little tickle in the back of your mind. It's like, well, you could do a contract here, and oh, but you'd be working with that guy, and you guys get along and you guys work together well. You just kind of so I keep a finger in partly just because I know what my friends are up to, but it's also a bit of that, that I can't quite let it go completely.
When is the last time that you were doing security contracting?
um, yeah, so in a conflict zone, like an active conflict zone, 2009. The last time in a less than active conflict zone, 2024.
Oh, wow. Wow. And people may be surprised by that because I think when people think contracting, they do think guys in their 20s and maybe early 30s, and because that's when your peak strength. And just like the Navy SEALs and even like fire departments and things like that have age limits, I think it does surprise people that they want to go back at this age where you are more likely to get an injury.
Right. But you know what? I think, the most powerful weapon a soldier's got is
Sure.
right between his ears, right? And that's still sharp. So, uh, but there's nothing that you can't really replace experience,
Yeah.
right? So,
So obviously you want people to pick up Red Warning, which is the latest, but as we said, you do a lot of stuff with the other authors at Double Dagger Books. Our audience does read a lot of military books, whether it's military fiction, military nonfiction. What books would you suggest that people check out that you've been a part of, or authors that you personally know?
yeah, well, I mean, we published a few really like tremendous books in the last little while. So, Andrew Goldsmith, who U.S. Army infantryman, Ranger, wrote The Mediocre Infantryman's Guide to Ranger School. And so he was like a leg infanteer, from a mech battalion who went to Ranger School not really knowing what to expect. Um, and it's the most honest story, the most honest sort of memoir about going through Ranger School and just the suck that is, and getting recycled, and kind of putting your head down and pushing through in the second go. There's just no BS, and there's so much BS in all of these kinds of stories. This is just like an average dude who shows you that it can be done. And it's hilarious as well, which really helps. Um, there's a Canadian officer, Matt Jones, who was in Afghanistan in an operation center that controlled drones, armed drones. Um, and he wrote a book called uh, Predators, Reapers, and More Dangerous Creatures.
Hmm.
Um, and it's fiction, and it's got sort of literary magical elements in it. I don't want to spoil the story, but there's like some weird stuff that happens in this book. But he really explores um, what it does to you to control these armed drones and to sort of murder from afar, right? Where you're not in any danger whatsoever. In fact, the greatest dangers to you are the people around you in the talk. It's
Yeah.
not the enemy per se, right? Um, and I'll mention just one last one.
Sure.
So David Brown was an OG Navy SEAL. He was like a Navy SEAL in the '80s. His first platoon commander was Lieutenant McRaven, who obviously went on to do good stuff in his later career.
Is that
Like,
Admiral McRaven?
yeah,
Okay, okay. Just
absolutely,
making sure.
yeah, for sure. And so the sort of hook with Dave with Brownie is that he's 5'4" Navy SEAL. You
Hmm.
don't see a lot of 5'4"
No,
Navy SEALs,
no.
right? Um, so in his story is not just like how he got through buds and how he became a SEAL, with his small stature being what it was. And not even just about how like what he had to learn in order to be that guy. It's all the things that he learned to become a SEAL. He applied to the rest of his life too, right? To his family, to his marriage, to his civilian career, and it doesn't play as well outside of buds, And so he kind of had to relearn how to be a good person, how to be a successful person after like the hardest lessons you could imagine. to become a SEAL. His book's called And Goliath. David and Goliath. It's kind of how we all face down. We face down these giants because for him it was the stature that was the problem, but for someone else it's something else. We all have our own sort of things that we have to face down.
Yeah, and those are the books that I think resonate with people. I know that the books of I said earlier, like the hero worship, a lot of them do well, but I do think the honest books where people do talk about their failures uh, happen to really resonate with people and let them know that these guys are only human. Even Chris's book, who is usually my other host on here, but Chris is actually speaking at the Ranger graduation. That's why he's not here right now. He's driving out there. But I mean, yeah, in
Cool.
his book, he talks about it actually sounds very similar. He does talk about the getting recycled thing in the Ranger way and all the
Yeah.
failures that he's had. And I think people do appreciate that honesty. So yeah, once again, check out Red Warning. The publisher is Double Dagger Books, philhalton.com. And then on the website, let's say that you are a guy looking to publish your own book. You have a whole section on there about how to coach other writers, and they could reach out to you. And I could tell you're very easy to get in touch with in that way at Phil_Halton on X. And this has been great, man. I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention, but I think if people check out your books, they're really going to get something out of it. And it's been a great discussion about actually the what we saw happen in Afghanistan and yeah, the history of that. And I wouldn't have been able to pinpoint when the war started, so I certainly learned something today.
Yeah, well, you know what, and nobody else seems to have been able to pinpoint it either. And
That's
I'm
good,
I'm
yeah.
certainly open to some discussion and argument about it because I think it's an unclear thing. But that to me was the first indicator that things were wobbly. That things were not what they seemed. But I really appreciate the conversation today and the opportunity to kind of start to share some of my own stories and hopefully to encourage other soldiers to share their stories too.
Absolutely. Are you watching any NHL playoffs or any of that?
Yeah, I keep a half an eye on that. Yeah.
Who's your team?
Well, I'm from Toronto, right? So,
Okay.
long suffering Maple Leafs, right?
Understandable. I'm an Islanders fan. I know the Islanders hate that you guys have John Tavares. I wasn't one of those people who's crying over it. I mean, there's literally videos on YouTube of Islander fans crying when he went to Toronto, which I thought was kind of ridiculous. Like the guy's just it's his hometown team. He wanted to be there. I get it.
Right,
But yeah, I
right.
think we're both in the same boat with when the hell are these teams going to actually go to a championship and win something. I would love to see it in my lifetime. So
Yeah, well, let's hope. Let's hope, right? Touch wood.
I don't remember off the top of my head because the Islanders are not in the playoffs. Is it Toronto? No, right?
They're in a series right now against the Senators.
Oh, okay, great, great. Okay,
Yeah.
have they played already?
Yeah, there was a game, and actually, and I should know who won it, but I don't.
Oh,
So
okay.
there you go.
Now I need to look out of curiosity. I am gonna look. Wait, hold up. NHL playoff bracket because I wasn't positive if they were in it. Let's see. Just as a hockey fan, I haven't been totally into it because the Islanders aren't in it. But yeah, Toronto beat Ottawa, so Toronto is up one
There
game
you
to
go.
zero against Ottawa, and they'll be playing. Whoever wins between this is interesting. Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers, two Florida teams, and the Florida
Right.
teams have been very good lately these past few years. Not exactly a region, and it's where I'm moving to, but not exactly a region that you think would be known for hockey with the warm climate.
Not a natural fit. Yeah, but maybe because they have to work harder at it. I don't know. It's more expensive to keep the ice rinks frozen, and so there's more money behind it. I don't know. Not sure.
Yeah, I'll be seeing the Islanders play the Panthers when I'm out there and all that. So,
That's
but
great.
yeah, this has been great. And I haven't been to Canada in a number of years, but I will reach out if I'm back out there for any type of reason. It's been actually a very long time. My parents have been there more recently than me. They're constantly traveling the globe and they've been all over and are just loving it.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. Happy to see more American visitors here because I think that's how the tension's going to reduce. It's
Yeah.
just normal people talking to normal people and realizing, hey, this isn't a thing.
Yeah, it's completely ridiculous, I think. So,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
That's all for this episode of Battle Line Podcast. But we're always posting new content on social media. Follow us on Instagram at Battle Line Podcast and on Twitter at Battle Line Pod. That's an order. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes up every Tuesday. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Believe in yourself. Face all challenges head on. And as always, never quit.